Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today we will be exploring your inner child. With me is Dr. Harris Whitfield, who is the author of the bestseller Healing the Child Within, as well as many other books, including The Truth About Depression, The Truth About Mental Illness, and Not Crazy. You may not be mentally ill. He is a psychiatrist and physician in private practice. Welcome, Charles.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to be with you. You sold over 1 million copies of your book, Healing the Child Within. It resonated with people in a major way. Probably surprised you, as a matter of fact, with how that book was received. Can you tell me how you developed the concept?
In the late 70s, we were beginning to understand the whole family systems approach to all kinds of life problems.
Yes.
And that's why I like this graphic sculpture here that has the family.
Yes, it does.
This is 5 individuals, the parents and the children represented. And so family systems was beginning, and the family toxicity and traumas were beginning more to be explored by more diverse groups, including self-help groups,
yes,
which started in 77 and 78, adult children of alcoholics, and then over time, Codependence Anonymous and some other 12-step groups. And so at conferences in the late 70s and early 80s, I kept hearing this term by many of the speakers, most not psychiatrists. There were 1 or 2 psychiatrists that were involved in this, but most psychologists, master's degree people, social workers, and just some savvy helpers and recovering people.
Yes.
And I kept hearing this term, inner child, that kid inside me, etc. And I kept wondering, what is that? What does that mean? Because I didn't understand it myself fully. So I knew roughly that they were going in the right direction. But in the early 80s, I brought in several of these speakers to speak to groups in our area in Baltimore, where I was at the time. And I would be riding with them in the car, picking them up at the airport, bringing them to the airport, or just interchange all along. And I would say, what is this inner child? What is this kid inside of us? What is this child within that you keep referring to? And this is like a handful of these speakers that were referring to it and talking about the whole recovery process from a family systems and a trauma perspective. None of them knew.
Oh.
None of them could define it.
In other words, it's a phrase they were using without really having understood or defined it.
Intuitively, they knew it was important.
Yes.
Because it was spread among them, and the audience that they were speaking to got it, understood it, that this was something important. But they couldn't give me a clear definition.
Right.
They would stammer, go back and forth. So finally I went up at a conference in Minneapolis, St. Paul, where I heard a talk by Bruce Fisher, who was a psychologist. And he was defining the true self and the false self.
Okay.
Now, I had already heard those terms, but and had read a little bit about it here and there, from textbooks to articles. But what he was describing fit with almost everything that I was intuitively getting about their message about trauma and recovery.
Okay. So you basically linked these two concepts.
I identified the child within as the true self.
Lots of times when I think of the notion of healing the child within, to me it suggests that the child got wounded at some point by, let's say, a trauma, and that arrested the development of the child. So the child remains, or an important part of the psyche remains fixated at the age of the child when the wounding occurred.
Yes, and so the way I have described that too, visually, is that the child goes into hiding.
Yeah.
Because it's no longer safe. It no longer feels safe to be real with these people surrounding it, including parents, parent figures, and anybody around them that it doesn't feel safe with to be real.
And when the child goes into hiding, something else has to come out.
What comes out is the false self, to kind of mind the shop of the mind, and it doesn't work very well to our deep satisfaction, physically, mentally, and spiritually.
And people spend often much of their lives having to come to terms with or to address or to do psychotherapy to deal with this false self that has kind of taken over their lives.
Yeah. Now, another term for the false self is the ego. As long as we don't confuse it with the old Freudian and Jungian, etc., concept, which was a attempt at combining the two, which they're really not the same. They're two totally different entities within our consciousness.
Well, I suppose the problem with psychological language at all is that we're trying to have a descriptor for something that is essentially non-physical. It's not as if you'll ever measure the inner child or the ego or the id or the superconscious mind or any of these things. They're abstractions that we create.
Yes, but people can go beyond abstraction when they hear real self, true self, and false self.
Well, I imagine for a lot of people who are caught up in all of this, if you tell them, well, your true self is not your ego, they'd probably be very confused. They would probably say, well, how am I ever going to find my true self at this point? I'm an adult. I've been developing all these habits throughout my life, and I don't know my true self from my false self anymore.
And that's what's so great about the feeling or the inner state confusion. Confusion is great because it opens us to say, do you mean there might be something else?
Yeah.
It's that don't know that Buddhists have talked about. So now I can reconsider what my internal reality may be now.
There's a medieval mystical text called The Cloud of Unknowing, which says that when you enter into this cloud and everything is confusing and puzzling to you, that is the beginning of a mystical or spiritual process.
Yes.
And so when your own work as a therapist, you work with people to help them recover their true self.
Yes, to experience it and see how good it can feel to be real with myself, with safe others, and eventually with the God of our understanding. But not safe others, because we've discovered over our years that if we're real with unsafe people, then it can hurt because they use it against us. They judge us, they attack us, they threaten, and it's a perfect intuitive inner reason to go into hiding.
You know, many, many years ago, back around the same time you were developing the work on the inner child, I interviewed a psychotherapist, a psychiatrist who was very popular in that era, Arthur Janoff, who came up with what was known as primal scream therapy. And he felt once you get in touch with your true self, you just want to scream. And he'd encourage people to let out these blood-curdling screams as if that was their true self.
And he found one skill to help us open.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, many people reported remarkable transformations when they got in touch with their primal scream. I have to think there's a lot more to the true self, though.
Oh, yeah.
So in your work, I guess it's important, whatever inner emotions need to come out to create a safe space for that.
Yeah. And we heal the best in the three relationships with self, safe others, and God. And the safe others we can find in therapy with a sponsor in a 12-step group, in group therapy, trauma-focused group therapy, or just general group therapy, and bibliotherapy. Journaling is a great way to express us. Certainly the journal is safe unless somebody unsafe picks up our journal and reads it and says, uh-oh, I got to tell them about this. They're really, this is really not true about them. I know how bad they are.
Oh, yeah.
And here they are trying to express that, etc. So we have to remember to leave our journal in a safe place.
Well, that's one of the problems with group therapy in general, I gather, is, you know, coming to trust the other group members. But now you've brought up God, and I know you've told me that at one time in your life you were an atheist yourself. Are you, if one has to have a relationship with God in order to completely heal the inner child, what about atheists? Are they forever going to be excluded from heaven?
I don't think so. From what we know about the near-death experience literature, no way. So we're all safe anyway. From A Course in Miracles to these near-death experiencers, we're perfectly safe. We just don't know it.
Well, if you have a patient who is an atheist, do you feel that it's your role as a therapist to try and convince them not to be?
It's not my job to convince them, but it's my job to work with them to find out where they are on their path of their own hero's journey, to find out about what their life is about. So it's from their perspective, not what I'm going to make them be any particular way.
I know in your own writing you often use the term the God of your understanding.
Right, which is a 12-step term, too.
Which allows for a lot of flexibility in terms of, or they often in the 12-step program speak of a higher power.
Correct.
I guess the point is simply that there are resources that are available to us that go vastly beyond our own ego.
Yeah, I mean, meditation, prayer, sharing with safe people, etc. All these skill devices and methods that we can use to get to the truth.
Now, one of the images that I've seen you use that struck me as especially helpful in dealing with the process of healing the inner child is it was almost looked like a financial chart. It had like these little loops going up and down and up and down and up and down and up and down. The little loops up and down, up and down, up and down, and then a larger cycle up and down, up and down, up and down, suggesting that this is what life is like. It seems as if we're having ups and downs, but when we're working on ourself, there's a progress, there's a sense of progression as well.
Yeah. So that's the cycle of the hero's journey that we repeat. And that's what all those cycles are. And that's what in 12-step programs, it's what we were like, which is the trauma, our crazy lives, our crazy behaviors, and so on. What happened, we got into a really painful conflict, and then we worked on it, and then we worked through it, and then we returned. So as Joseph Campbell has described it in the mythical hero's journey,
yes.
Separation, initiation, and return. And that's what each of those cycles are for one particular conflict as we go along, living and exploring the divine mystery.
And in any given human life, we go through this cycle, I guess, hundreds of times.
Countless times.
Each time, hopefully, we'll learn a little bit more.
Yeah, and that's what's so great about it, is it's a learning experience.
And this is something that you consciously construct or supervise with your clients in a psychotherapy context, but it also represents life as a whole, as if that process that occurs in psychotherapy isn't any different than a well-lived life.
What I described in Healing the Child Within were the 4 steps of the whole process.
Okay.
And that is learning to be real by practicing being real with safe others. Finding out what my healthy human needs are, grieving my ungrieved hurts, traumas, losses, and then finally working through my core recovery issues, which I've written about in one of my recent books called Wisdom to Know the Difference, Core Issues in Relationships, Recovery, and Living.
Now, some people, when they begin to work with their inner child, actually literally regress back to a childlike state. I had a good friend who was traumatized and regressed back to an 8-year-old, had to literally grow up all over again over a process of a couple of years.
And that can be positive if you have the right support system.
Yes, that's what it required, was, because she became an 8-year-old, an adult woman.
There's so many people, though, that are arrested as an 8-year-old. You could say, here's somebody who's 30 years old going on 3.
Yeah.
They're arrested in 3. So what they do is they get mislabeled as bipolar, or you name it, a whole list of things, when in fact what they have is post-traumatic stress disorder, and they have just age regressed, or they continue to age regress. And so what's great about age regression is when we learn about the details of its dynamics, then we can learn to self-identify. Oh, I'm age regressing. Right now I'm age regressing. I just feel like my heart has sunk out of my chest, and I'm scared, I'm numb, don't know what to do. So I self-diagnose. And then I get up and walk around the room and look at objects to ground myself. And I can pick up my keys and play with my keys, which will help me ground further. And then I can find somebody safe to talk to pull more out of the age regression. And then I can write down my experience, and then go to my sponsor, go to my therapist, and discuss what my experience has been now of age regression, and then finally make meaning of it. Say, what is all this about, and what have I learned here?
Because the inner child is in hiding. So if we get a glimpse of that inner child, what you're saying is take advantage of that glimpse to get to know the inner child, to work with the inner child, to create a safe space for the inner child to come out.
Yeah. So what we're doing is we're continuing to learn from our mistakes and from our pain.
Mm-hmm. And of course, some people have very painful childhoods. In an earlier interview, you and I were talking about the percentage of people who have had traumatic experiences in childhood.
Probably well over 50%, probably in the neighborhood of 70 to 80%. And in some countries, in some societies, it's 90 to 100% of significant childhood trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And so what they're walking around with, they're in a survival mode. They got PTSD and they don't know it.
Well, you're making me wonder about a practice such as circumcision. I know Freud explored this amongst Jewish children, many Christian children as well. The infant is only a few days old, and a surgical procedure is done on the child. I don't know if anesthetics are used. I suspect often not. It's almost as if in a religious context, the child is deliberately traumatized. I think Freud suggested as much.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that's one of our first traumas. Our first trauma is being born.
Mm-hmm.
A totally different world, obviously.
Yeah.
But then comes circumcision, and that's in boys.
Yeah.
What about girls?
Mm-hmm.
Girls have a more horrendous circumcision in some cultures, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And so that whole idea of circumcision is a major trauma.
Oh yes, female circumcision. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the clitorectomy. Well, there's also to be considered, I should think, traumas in the womb.
And that's what Stan Grof has addressed in his writings.
Yeah. So if we include those prenatal traumas that occur for many, in fact, I understand from the literature that in gestation, oftentimes, more often than people realize, there are twins, and they're struggling with each other for nutrition. And sometimes in that struggle, one of the twins will, in effect, kill the other.
Yeah, that's beyond me, but I would refer to Stan Grof for that kind of understanding.
Yeah.
But certainly, we can do a few things prenatally, and that is for the mother to live healthy, and do everything she can to not stress this new child.
But I think it's probably fair to say that nobody is without stress and at least mild forms of trauma in their life growing up, where there are always deprivations and, or experienced traumas. Surely every child has had a tantrum.
Yeah, and those tantrums can be can and are normal, healthy as a rule for these certain ages.
Yeah.
But if they keep up later and later in life, or if you get parents that don't know how to handle a tantrum, then that can make the child feel crazier. And then the child can get mislabeled with some kind of mental illness, and here they are under 10 years old, and they now have got a mislabel of a mental illness, and then, God forbid, they're put on drugs, and the drugs make them worse more often than not.
Because your preference in dealing with this process of healing the inner child is to work without drugs.
Yes, it is. The rare situations, some rare drugs, some drugs that I have prescribed to help with fear and anxiety, and that's buspirone, and then for sleep, clonidine. But in general, the psych drugs too often don't work well and can make people worse, including they get addicted, and if they try to stop or they miss their doses, they feel crazier. And that's just withdrawal. That's just drug withdrawal, like, as though it was, whether it was a painkiller withdrawal or alcohol withdrawal.
So what you're saying is that the direct encounter with whatever is going on inside, the processing of that inner turmoil is the most healing.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, find out what's going on in my inner life, share it with safe people, including the God of our understanding, pray, meditate, and live and learn.
Well, that's probably good advice for everybody. And we all have an inner child that can benefit, I suppose, from love, attention, appreciation. Well, Dr. Charles Whitfield, thank you so much for sharing this half hour with me. It has been a privilege and a pleasure.
Thank you, Jeff.
And thank you for being with us.